All right, welcome back, everybody. We're recording this because we had the most devastating tech disasters in the history of the Spellbreakers podcast. It was like a digital Fukushima or something. But the veterans here on the call tell me that this is normal for them. So pretty exciting to see what is causing such crazy distortions and such. Once again, we have returning to the podcast Jerry Marzinsky. He's a retired licensed psychotherapist with over 35 years of experience working with and studying the thought process of psychotic and criminally insane patients in some of the most volatile psychiatric institutions in the nation. He's a certified MACE practitioner. He's done a bunch more stuff as well. Please support Jerry. His link is down below, jerrymarzinsky.com as well. He's written several books that you should check out. As well, we have a very special guest, a friend and colleague of Jerry's, known as Anon. Anon had previously been diagnosed with schizophrenia in his mid-20s. Anon recovered the condition by treating it as a religious battle and shamanic experience. After undergoing a series of torments, trials, and tribulations from the very intense negative thoughts and internal voices, it was a profound vision of reality glitching that occurred about 33 years ago which saved his life. The last time he was on any medication for the condition was over 30 years ago. Today, he's working as a successful engineer, but continues to search for truth and spiritual understanding. Anon is going to walk us through a lot of very interesting stuff today, but for now, I want to kick things over to Jerry. Jerry, how are things going? Any updates since we've last spoken? What's going on, man?
Well, private practice is doing pretty well. You can pick that up on my website at jerrymarzinsky.com if you want to make an appointment. But what I wanted to do is just kind of do a little brief summary before turning things over to Anon. Um, I can talk about this all day long, but to have the people who experience this thing come on and fly in the face of what the psychiatric mafia is telling everybody that these voices that schizophrenics hear are hallucinations. They're not hallucinations. Okay. So I've been studying them for, you know, probably close to a half a century, and they are not hallucinations. They run well defined, repeatable patterns. Hallucinations don't do that. They're all over the place. They're positive, they're negative, they're just all over the place. These things are consistently negative. They're anti-religious. They foster and create negative emotion. They energetically drain their victims. So once I saw they were running patterns, that got my attention because hallucinations don't run patterns. You know, and the psychiatric mafia has done no studies over the voices that schizophrenics hear. They just basically went, "We're the high priest of psychiatry. We hereby declare that the voices are hallucinations because we said so." They have nothing to back it, absolutely nothing. So after I got out of graduate school, I went to work at one of the biggest psychiatric hospitals on the planet, Central State Hospital. It had close to 10,000 patients there when I got there. They had everything in the universe was in there. For me, who was interested in psychopathology, it was like a kid in a candy store. And schizophrenics were particularly interesting because they tended to be the most intelligent of the bunch, um, but they couldn't function. They were hearing voices, and these voices, when they paid attention to them, would get them in trouble. So there was a one-to-one correspondence between them listening to whatever these voices were telling them, and they're getting in trouble. Okay? Um, and I would ask other staff. I said, "What are these voices? Where they come from? What?" Everybody just parroted what they were taught in school. Well, they're hallucinations. You know, but it was odd that there was a one-to-one correspondence between their listening to these voices and them getting in trouble. And I said, "Well, what causes them?" "Oh, it's a chemical imbalance of the brain." And I went, "Okay." And that's what I was taught too. But after the first year, I noticed that psychiatrists, when they brought in a psych patient with schizophrenia, they would not give any tests to see what chemicals in the brain were out of balance or by how much. I never saw them give any kind of objective test. They just kind of went, with a dartboard and went, okay, we're going to start off with this medication because I think that's what the one that would work the best. If that didn't work, they go switch to another and then another and another, and then they'd increase and decrease the amount. If that didn't work, they'd start combining them and they'd put them on different ones altogether. And there was no objective test. You'd think if it was a chemical imbalance of the brain, they would have some kind of test to determine what chemicals were out of balance and by how much, and some kind of baseline. And on the day, do you ever see them give any kind of test for?
Absolutely not. So I had spent 4 weeks in a psychiatric ward, and everything that Jerry's saying is very accurate. I mean, you're basically a guinea pig as a patient there. They would give you this pill and that pill to try and snap you out of it, different combinations, and these are not the type of drugs that you want to take. I mean, the side effects are awful, and plus they do damage the gray matter of our brain and then the long-term usage of it. But I asked the same question because they told me, "Oh, your brain chemistry's off. We have to get it back correctly." And I said, "Well, what's the baseline? Where should it be?" They just gave me blank looks. Nobody could answer the question. They didn't show me a sheet that showed where all the chemistry should be or anything like that. You have a swimming pool, you test the pH of the pool, you know where it should be as far as its acidity or its base, where it should be. With the treatment of the schizophrenics with the medications, there's no baseline for where the brain chemistry should be that they're even basing these medications off of.
And it turns out that they don't even know what the chemical composition of the brain should be, let alone what's out of balance. They have no idea what's out of balance. They go, oh, serotonin, da, da. No, it's not. That's been disproven. Matter of fact, that whole theory of the chemical imbalance of the brain has been totally disproven years ago, and they're still pushing it. They're still teaching it in the universities. They're still advertising, but they changed it a little bit when they come up with an advertisement for these antipsychotic drugs. They go, oh, it is believed that it is a chemical imbalance of the brain.
Yeah, and that's
So,
just now coming out.
no, it's been out for a while.
Yeah, but in the
You know,
mainstream, like they're
oh,
like, oh, we just made it up. One
well,
guy made
that's
it
what they
up.
did.
Yeah.
It was made up by Eli Lilly back in I think it was the 70s when they came out with Prozac. They needed an explanation for why, their antidepressant worked. And they went, well, it's a chemical and it affects chemicals in the body, and these people seem to feel a little better, so it must be a chemical imbalance of the brain. It was completely made up. There was nothing to back it, and they knew it at the time. They went with it anyway. So now they're teaching it in the universities, and they're making, I think it's what, $7 billion a year selling these antidepressants, and the same thing with antipsychotic drugs. They're making billions of dollars a year selling these drugs. They're not looking for a cure. They have dropped the research money for schizophrenia down to a trickle. The drug companies don't make any money with a cure. They make money by constantly treating people with these toxic drugs, and they are toxic. You know, with long-term use, they will rot out your brain and your peripheral nervous system. And they found that out with state hospital patients when they started doing autopsies on them. Their brains were shrunk like walnuts. And then the researchers who found that published the findings, and the psychiatric mafia and big pharma went nuts. So, oh no, so these drugs with long-term use are deleterious. And what I found out later was that the voices actually tell the patients that they're being poisoned by the psychiatrist. Now, the psychiatry has one of the highest assault rates of any doctors out there. They're beat up by their patients more than almost any other doctor or nurse out there. And I noticed that when I was working at the state hospital. They were always getting popped. And I was wondering, like, what are they doing to these people where after, 15 or 20 minutes, seeing these people once a month, that these patients are assaulting them? I just couldn't figure it out. It just didn't make sense. After 7 years, I ran into a patient who explained to me that the voices were telling her that the psychiatrist was poisoning them, and pointed to the side effects, the nasty side effects that Anon was talking about of these drugs. And telling the patient that they were being poisoned by the psychiatrist and that these side effects were the result of being poisoned. So that accounted for the uh, mass number of assaults that these psychiatrists were facing, and that they're also being murdered at a higher rate than most other doctors also. So it was a complete fabrication. It was a complete lie. Now their DSM is also a fabrication. This is their listing of psychiatric disorders. They're completely made up. There is not a single test to back up any of what they're saying with regard to these psychiatric disorders.
The
There's
Diagnostic Statistical Manual is what DSM stands for, by the
right,
way.
and it's a listing of psychiatric disorders. It started out with like 100 in the 50s, and it just kept increasing. So what they do is they make up these disorders, and they look for something that they think that they could create some drug for to treat. And 2/3 of the staff on the psychiatry board who makes these things up are in bed with big pharma. So they have these meetings once every 3 years, and they make these things up. So they add them up and they take them off. You know, uh, they have like mathematics disorder was one of the ones that they recently put on. Um, they have some ridiculous ones. Uh, what was another one? It was a behavioral disorder. Kids that fight. It's a behavioral disorder. Um, and if there's
It's really just insurance. It's really just they're just really just creating insurance codes.
right.
Is really what it comes down to. And the problem with mental illness is not like, okay, if somebody's bipolar, they're just bipolar. A lot of times somebody can have all different aspects from those different categories, but they have to categorize it for insurance code purposes, even though it may not necessarily match what the particular patient is undergoing or exhibiting.
Yeah, so what we have here today is we got more psychiatrists and psychologists and more psychiatric medications on the planet than any other time in human history. And we're in worse shape than we've ever been. Mental illness is increasing astronomically. You know, nobody's getting better. So despite a lot of these people being on antidepressant drugs, we have 50,000 people in the United States killing themselves every single year, year after year after year, and it's increasing. Nobody's getting better. We're getting worse. All these people are doing with their drugs are treating the symptoms. They're not treating the cause.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where the MACE energy method comes in that we spoke about a little bit earlier, with Eric. That goes in and it gets rid of the cause of many mental illnesses. You know? And it turns out that psychiatry isn't much better. They did a research study on, I saw in graduate school that you either publish or perish in academic psychology. So they had to publish, and it didn't matter what they published. So when they did this research study on and tried to replicate a, a large number of the research findings that they did in psychology, 80% of them could not be replicated. That means they were bullcrap.
Yeah.
They're just publishing garbage. You know? So
Yeah,
I
Jerry,
think that,
I'd be curious. Do you think other mental illnesses as well are a form of possession? Because I know people who have like close family members who struggled with severe bipolar before they had any diagnosis, and I mean, we're talking hallucinations, thinking have godlike powers, and then being suicidal 20 times a day, just horrible, horrible stuff. Hearing voices, hallucinating, seeing things, and I mean, they attribute, the drugs to them getting stable, but I mean, yeah, what do you think is going on there? Do you think other illnesses as well are also possession?
well, I think it's a combination of both. It's what we found with what John Mace found was that there's something called a negative identity, okay, which occurs during a trauma. So what happens is during the trauma, a decision is made about who you are as a result of the trauma, and you don't make good decisions about yourself in a trauma. So a negative decision about who you are is made during that trauma. It's painful, as well as the results of the trauma. So the ego takes it, buries it in the subconscious mind, and locks it down. Then it becomes like a computer virus. It's like a mind virus. That so if a trauma happens to somebody and they decide, well, this happened to me because I'm a bad person, that gets locked in there,
Mhm.
and it's running in the background all the time. I'm a bad person. I'm a bad person. I'm a bad person. So it affects the decisions they make. It affects how they come across to people. It affects what they do, what they don't do. So it's a negative program that can be gotten rid of with the MACE energy method. Now, these other things, like Anon was talking about, those are actual entities. You know, they're out there. They hit everybody. You could be walking down the sidewalk and you get a negative thought come into your mind. Like I had a guy write me a couple of weeks ago. He said, "Oh, what you told me about these entities putting thoughts in your mind and intrusive thoughts coming from them, that's true. I was behind my boss the other day and I had this impulse and this thought to spit on him." He said, "I didn't do it, but he said I had the impulse." So everybody's experienced that. You're walking along
Mhm.
minding your own business, and all of a sudden you have this nasty thought to do something that you would never do consciously. You would never voluntarily do it.
Yeah, yeah,
They test everybody. They're trying to see if people are vulnerable
Right.
to them.
that's exactly it. And I was just gonna say that I noticed in my own life, like I've started doing like daily spiritual practice for a while now, and really focusing and being diligent, because I find it's a slippery slope in all of our lives, right? Like, you even for me, I have a little alcohol, and I feel like it can be a slippery slope. Then you start, it seems like we're constantly opting in and consenting to them, at least in a small way. Has that been your guys' experience, or?
Well, at some point you have to, kind of voluntarily or involuntarily let them in. They
Yeah.
and meth is one of the worst drugs you could take for this. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, it just opens you up wide to these things coming in. The other thing that opens people up is severe trauma. You know, uh, Sexual abuse, bad physical abuse, emotional abuse. Trauma is another thing that opens people up to those things.
100%.
The way I look at it is they go after those that have fissures in their psyche,
Yeah.
crevices. And a lot of those have been through various forms of trauma have crevices or fissures in their psyche that allows them to get in. They're almost like sharks feeding. They're going
Mm.
to look for the wounded animal, one that they can get into a lot easier than one that's completely solid and healthy. And that's what they tend to go for.
So where I see, I denied what I was seeing for years. I mean, the evidence was overwhelming, and I started talking to these schizophrenic patients. What are these voices telling you? You know? And it was always negative stuff, nothing positive. It was always negative. And then what was interesting when it's like two psychiatrists at the hospital found out that I was asking these patients about what their voices were telling them, I got pulled up into their offices and ordered to stop asking them questions about the voices because what I was doing was reinforcing their hallucinations and making them worse.
Yep.
Right. So I was threatened if I didn't stop asking questions about what the voices were telling these people that I would be in trouble. So
Right. And Jerry,
they,
you saw an almost universality to these voices, right? Like they were always negative and they were very similar. Do you suspect that it's like one entity per individual? Did you ever suspect that, it was the same entity messing with many individuals? Like, were you ever
no,
able
it
to
look
like
it,
identify them, or?
well, it looks like they're assigned to that individual. So there's a hierarchy there too. They have overlords that assign them to destroy a particular individual. Um, and there was one case where it was a female where they weren't doing a good enough of job and they were pulled off and other ones were put in there. So there's a hierarchy to them. Um,
Yeah, I faced a hierarchy. They went up the management chain, that's for sure.
yeah, and I ran into that too when we got rid of the voices in one patient, and okay, they said okay, those voices are gone. Next thing I know, another one came in, And I said, well, I thought we got rid of them. Where are they? Where'd this one come from? And they said, well, that one's the overlord. That one was pissed. It was angry that the other ones had left.
Mm-hmm.
So, they're told that if they do not torment a
Yep.
particular individual, that they will cease to exist,
Yep.
and that they have no light in them. Okay, so when they find out they do have light in them, they're furious with the overlords for lying to them, and I found that interesting. But these things are entities. I denied that until a series of events when I was working with patients at the state prison. You know, one day, one guy I was working with who got better, was getting better. He stops in the doorway as he's leaving. He turns around to me and he goes, "Do you realize what you're doing is dangerous, don't you?" And that took me by surprise. I didn't even think about it. It was like, well, that they're stuck in your head, not mine. You know, I, and I didn't say anything back, but I went, well, that's odd. It was like a shot being fired across the bow, like a warning sign from this guy. You know, are you sure you know what you're doing? I didn't stop. So the next one that happened was uh, that same guy knocked on my door without a pass. I don't know how he got into the medical unit without a pass. Knocked on my door and he said, "The voices want to talk to you." He said they want to talk to me personally. That had never happened before. It was always I would talk to them through the patient, and he would be like the interpreter. And I said, "They want to talk to me personally." He said, "Yeah, they want to talk to you personally."
Wow.
And I said, "Okay, come on in. Let's see what they have to say." So I sat him down, closed the door. He said, "Well, what do they have to say?" And these words came out of his mouth. He said, "You have no right to interfere with our way of life." And I was like, boom, my head just exploded. It was like they are separate entities. And the prisoner was saying that wasn't me. I didn't do that. I didn't say that. That came from them.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't me. And it wouldn't have been very nice if I had more power over them than they had to me. So it wouldn't have been good for them to be messing with my head and me to find out about it. So
Mm-hmm.
he swore it wasn't me. That was them. So that was a direct warning. You know,
Wow.
you have no right to interfere with our way of life. And that was after kind of messing up these patterns. So I'm like, what happens if I start messing with these patterns? Then I got the warning. And then several weeks after that, uh, I came in with a article from a shaman saying these things were also parasites. They were sucking the energy out of these people when they turned their emotional state negative. So I
Mm-hmm.
started investigating that, and I found out that was true. They were saying time after time, when the voices show up, my energy disappears. I have none. One guy said it's like working out in the hot sun all day. He just didn't have any energy left. So I brought this book in that was talking about these things being parasites, and I brought in one of the schizophrenic patients I was working with, and I read him that and said, "Okay, I'm going to read you this. I want your opinion on it," because I was always asking questions. I was always running things by them. I was always investigating, always searching. And so I went to read that thing, and all of a sudden, behind my head, this loud electrical crackling erupted. It sounded just like an arc welder. And it was going crack, 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 all the way up the right-hand wall of my office. And I'm looking at this prisoner, and he looked like a zombie. He was like just frozen there. And I asked him, "Do you hear that?" And he didn't respond. He just stared at me like a zombie. Then it crackled across the top of the office. It crackled down the side wall of the left side, and then it jumped into this Rubbermaid trash can by my left leg. I looked in there, and there wasn't nothing there. And I was freaked out. I mean, just totally freaked out. And then he gets up very slowly and he goes, "I gotta leave." And he walks down the office, and I'm like, "Yeah, get out of here. Go, go, go." And I was totally freaked out. I mean, I was like, boom, my
Mm-hmm.
my head had exploded. I closed the office. I didn't see anybody the rest of the day. It took me 4 months, 3 or 4 months before I had the courage to call him back and to ask him, "Did you hear that?" So I called him back. I asked him, "Did you hear that?" He looked good. I was expecting him to be a wreck. Uh, and he looked good. And I said, "I expect you to be wrecked." He said, "Well, I was doing what you told me to fight back against them. I haven't got rid of them, but it's like a Mexican standoff. They're not making any progress, and I'm not losing any ground." So I asked him, I said, did you hear that crackling the last time you were in here? And he goes, yeah, I heard it, but I was surprised that you did. And I said, what was that? He said, that was them. And I said, them who? He said, that those were the voices. And I said, well, what were they doing? He said, well, they were trying to scare you off. And I said, well, they did a damn good job about it. And I asked him, I said, you looked really strange when you left my office. And I said, what were the voices telling you when you left my office? And he said, they were telling me to go get a shank and stick it in your gut. And I'm thinking, oh, he wouldn't do that. I mean, I've been working with this guy for 6 months. I know him. He wouldn't do that. I said, well, why didn't you do it? He said, because I couldn't find one and nobody would give me one. So I have no doubt in my mind that these voices that the schizophrenics are hearing are not hallucinations. These things are negative entities. They're parasitic. So I wanted to kind of bring Anon in so he could tell you his experience from a first hand perspective instead of just listening to me. Um, so I'm going
Yeah.
to turn it over to Anon now and let him tell his story. And I think he'll back up pretty much everything I said.
Yeah, for
Uh,
sure.
uh,
Jerry, thank you for sharing. And yeah, Non, I just want to thank you in advance for your bravery, for coming on, for speaking, letting other people know that there is help. It is possible to go from having these experiences to living a productive life. And yeah, please, you have the floor. I'd love to start. Maybe you could just tell us kind of your background, what happened when you started getting schizophrenic, and then we could go from there.
well, thank you, Donnie. Yeah, listen to what Jerry is saying. I was bringing back all these memories and everything, and I give such a credit to him for taking this on to try and reveal the truth of what's going on out there. And just the fact that he was asking the patients, what are the voices saying? That's actually the scientific method. He wanted to know, and he was reprimanded for that. That I never understood why, because it makes absolutely no sense. If you're investigating something, you want to look at all aspects of it. So Jerry and I connected probably a little over 2 years ago. I've never been a patient of his, but I saw the great work that he was doing to get the message out there of what is going on. And so we've kind of started explaining some of this stuff. So my background, I had kind of religious upbringing in the normal sense. I was baptized Greek Orthodox. I attended a Methodist Sunday school, and I participated in a Roman Catholic youth group in high school. So I was aware of what the scriptures said and what the Bible was saying. But I took it kind of the aspect of just being a decent human being. I wasn't into Bible thumping or anything like that out there or being very preachy. So when I graduated college, I was kind of in the midst of determining kind of where I wanted to go in life, what I wanted to do. And I kind of found myself falling inwards into my psyche because I never had the chance to do that. And upon doing so, I think a lot of suppressed childhood trauma was starting to froth forth. There were times where I would say I felt Christ-like, very euphoric. And in college, I'd taken courses on psychology. So I'd taken courses on abnormal psychology. I was very aware of the DSM manual that Jerry had mentioned. I was very aware of the diagnosis of bipolar and schizophrenia, manic depressive, so on and so forth. But when I started to encounter some of this stuff, I was kind of in a state of cognitive dissonance. It's like, my textbooks are saying one thing, but boy, some aspects of this, it really felt like something was trying to take over my personality, like an attempted possession. So what happened is I was starting to, I guess, going into a deep state of depression. This probably would have been early 1990. And at times I felt like I had some sort of mission to fulfill on this planet, like Christ-like feelings, like a redeemer or savior. And part of my mind is saying, okay, that's nuts. What makes you any different than any other nut job, having these feelings or sensations?
Well, you're doing that mission right now.
And in a way, yes. And then at times I started to feel like I didn't have any worth anymore. Like my whole self-worth was being totally destroyed. Something
Wow.
was telling me that I had no value to this world, to give it up. Um, it was telling me that nobody likes you. You don't deserve friends. And this kind of started to continue on over the months. And I wasn't sure whether it was my own thoughts doing this or if it was something from the outside doing it. I graduated with a degree in mechanical engineering, so I have a very logical, rational mind. And then here I am encountering these intense voices, intense thoughts. It's like, what is going on here? So throughout this whole ordeal, I was back and forth. I was on the fence whether these were my own thoughts or if something was putting them into my head or into my mind.
See, and that's something that every schizophrenic has to struggle with. Is
Yeah.
this my thought or is it something else? And the prisoners would ask the voices, "Who are you? What are you?" And they would say, "We are you."
Yep.
So they want you to believe, they want these people to believe that the voices that they're hearing in their head are who they are. And if they fall for that, then they start moving in like Anon said, and they start pushing the original personality out of the way, and they start taking over. They start telling you when he was talking about the negative thoughts, they will say stuff like you're no good, you're rotten, you're ugly, you're stupid, nobody likes you, your parents, you don't trust your parents, your girlfriend's cheating on you, your boyfriend's cheating on you. They try to break up relationships, they try to remove the person and isolate them. So they're just with the voices, listening to the voices all the time.
Hmm.
Go
Try to
ahead, Anon.
distort, they distort, I'll call it their target or their victim. They distort their targets or victims' reality to make them anxious, paranoid, um, feeling somewhat delusional, where it makes it very tough for the target, the victim, or the patient to determine what's real and what isn't. These entities are deliberately trying to upset their targets to generate some sort of a, I guess, negative psychic energy seems to be
Yeah.
what we think is going
Well,
on
that's
here.
that's what they're doing, and that's what they feed off of. That's
Hmm.
that's that's their food. So that's why they're consistently negative. They don't say anything positive. It's all negative garbage that they're putting in the person's head. People are chasing you. You're going to die. Uh, People hate you. I mean, it's every negative thing you can think of. They're throwing into the person's mind to generate that negative emotional energy, and then they suck it off. Now, how they do that, I have no idea, but it happens.
And they also have the ability to access their target or victim's thoughts too. And sometimes they'll bring them up. Sometimes they'll distort them. I remember I used to go fishing as a kid for like sunnies, bass, trout, and everything. And of course, you got if you're using live bait, you got to hook the worm. Well, these voices are, I'll just call them entities to make it easier. These entities would say things like, you have no, see what a horrible being you are. You kill earthworms to go fishing. You don't deserve to live. You think you're a good person. You're not. You're a horrible human being. I mean, they would do this stuff to make you feel guilty for your existence. It was almost like I felt like my soul was going through some sort of judgment by some sort of tribunal or jury or a series of adversaries in a sense. So what happened is I was getting so depressed from all these attacks. I was trying to establish my life. I was trying to get on with the career, get out of the house. A lot of suppressed childhood trauma was coming up. Frothing for there's so much going on simultaneously. I mean, at times my mind felt like it was in manic overload. Other times I couldn't even add two plus two together. Like
Right.
something was, my thoughts were so discombobulated and overwhelmed. Sometimes I couldn't even think straight. So I reached a point where I think I was accessed through a social program, some counseling. They put me on lithium, a low dose of lithium at the time. And I was so depressed, I couldn't even remember to even take the dosage each day. I mean, I didn't want to get out of bed. I didn't want to eat anymore because these voices are telling me that you're not worthy of food. You don't deserve to eat. Just give it up. It was basically trying to do everything it could to kind of end my life or make me to commit suicide. At times, it would actually tell me how to go about committing suicide. One was it would tell me to climb up a high voltage electrical tower and jump into the high voltage wires. I thought that was a rather dramatic way to go, but that's something I kept pushing in my head. The other thing was by carbon monoxide poisoning, by connecting the exhaust to my car. And there were times where I actually was connecting the exhaust pipes, hooking up a hose to my car to kill myself with the carbon monoxide poisoning. But I guess higher thoughts saved me or prevent me from doing that.
And keep in mind, 50,000 people a year in the US are succumbing to those same voices. You don't just go out and go, "Hey, I'm going to commit suicide today." You hear something in your head saying, "Well, life isn't worth living. You know, you're a mess up. Nobody likes you. You just get it over with and quit. quit messing with everybody, quit messing up their lives. Just 50,000 people a year are succumbing to these same things that Anon now.
Yeah, they want you to give it up.
Yep.
So I was on lithium, and I remember my body started thrashing quite a bit all over the place. Like my arms would move, my legs would move, and I didn't feel like I was the one moving it. It was like something else was in there. And I remember at times there were certain thoughts, like something was trying to take me over to do like impulsive things, and it was really atypical of my normal behavior or personality. Like something else was getting in there and trying to take over my personality to change me. I was always pretty much a good kid growing up. I wasn't. I tried to be ethical and have integrity and civil and be honest. I was no saint by any means, but I wasn't getting into trouble. I think I was well respected. So to have these whole thoughts coming in my mid 20s, that was totally counter my normal personality. It didn't seat right. Something was off. So I think I had to go in a state of a split mind to deal with all this. One aspect was the actual the victim, the patient, or the target who was encountering all these things, and the other one was the observer, because I take a normal psychology course. I into the sciences, so I wanted to observe what is going on here a little bit too. Almost like I was taking notes of what was occurring in my head at the same time. So I was an observer and a participant in what was occurring simultaneously. But I remember with the lithium, so I got rushed to the ER because they thought it might be something neurological or that I was on drugs or something like that. And they concluded that it was psychological, not neurological, not physical or anything like that. I think they put me through an MRI machine, look for a tumor or anything like that. They did blood work on me to see if there's any drugs or if I had a lithium overdose. And they never mentioned anything about there being excessive lithium in my system or anything. So within a few days of the ER submission, I was submitted to a psychiatric hospital. I was there for about 4 weeks. And just as Jerry said, they basically gave you all these different pills. I remember trying pink ones, blue ones, oval shaped ones, octagon ones, multicolored ones. They give you this combination. If that didn't work, they give you a different combination. They put in a little Dixie cup for you, a little micro cup type of thing, and you take it type of thing. And the side effects were awful. I mean, I remember sometimes I felt like I had 80-pound weights on each foot. I could barely walk or move. Other times I remember I would turn my head and the scenes would go to catch up to where I was looking. I'd go back and the scenes would shift. Extremely dry mouth. There's some days in the psychiatric hospital I don't even remember what had occurred.
I have a quick list of side effects just for antidepressants, and they're worse for antipsychotics. So it's nausea, weight gain, trouble sleeping, dry mouth, blurred vision, dizziness, anxiety, headache, diarrhea or constipation, sexual problems, fatigue, tremors, increased swelling, lower alcohol tolerance, bleeding, lower sodium levels, vomiting, restlessness, muscle cramps, and seizures. And it just goes on and on. It's worst for these antipsychotic
Yep.
drugs. So basically, these things are toxins. These are toxic effects of those psychiatric drugs. They're basically poisoning the patient, and they found through these autopsies that they're shrinking their brain.
Yep.
So they're actually doing physiological damage to these people by keeping them on these drugs for long periods of time. Now, there's a lot of people that are so far out that they need to be on those drugs,
Yep.
but most people don't. I mean, they're doing long-term damage without some other kind of treatment like MACE to go along with these drugs.
Well, the short term, yes, sometimes you do need the drugs. The drugs are basically tranquilizers as far as I'm concerned.
Yes.
Because I remember being on some of the stuff, I looked fine from the outside, but inside my mind, the turmoil was still going on back and forth. It just, I couldn't just express to the outside world.
And the
I
voices
remember,
don't go away either. They may subside, but they don't go away.
Hmm.
I remember being in the lobby of the psychiatric hospital, and I was just walking along, and I would walk into a wall, and I would keep walking. My arms and legs would be moving. I remember part of me was thinking, this must look so stupid. I'm walking into a wall and I can't turn. But at the same time, I realized I couldn't find the train of thought to turn my body to not walk into the wall. Like something else was taking over my neuromuscular system and moving me for me, and it wasn't me. And again, I'm in a state of cognitive dissonance. It's like, this feels like a possession, like something's trying to take me over, but that's not what my psychiatric college textbooks said, this is something entirely different. But boy, sure felt like some things were trying to push my personality to the side or take it over or somehow merge with it.
Yeah.
And I remember one night in the psychiatric hospital, the voices got very intense. It almost sounded like a cacophony of all these different voices. And I was lying in bed and I was just like ignoring them. And the entities, they don't want you to sleep. They try and keep you up.
Yeah.
But these voices sound like I was in a movie theater before the show starts or a play before the show starts. Everybody's talking back and forth in the audience. That's what it was like. It was all these voices. It sounded like men's voices, women's voices, children's voices. And I had a feeling that they were talking about me or they're trying to attack me. And I'm very aware at the time, man, this is madness. I knew that my mind was not right.
Yep.
There's one patient where they were talking behind his back saying, how should we kill him? Should we kill him this way or should we kill him that way? Or should we let him live? So you could hear.
Part of me was treating this as a spiritual religious battle based on my somewhat religious upbringing. The other part of me was just like, this is madness. This makes no sense. Why is my mind doing this? Like I said, I was going back and forth on the fence throughout this entire time. But I remember that night of the cacophony of all the different voices. Eventually, it got to be less voices. It became about 12 voices. And it's almost like it was a council, like talking back and forth. Then I think it went down to about 7. But I distinctly remember one of the voices talking to the other voices and saying very distinctively, what are we going to do about him? And then I'm like, wow, these things really are talking about me. And of course, I'm in the psychiatric hospital. I'm being interviewed occasionally by the psychiatrist. And they would always ask me, are you hearing voices? And I was always give the caveat, yeah, I am, but it's just my mind playing tricks on me, or just I'm not getting enough sleep. I didn't want to kind of reveal really what was going on because I wanted to kind of face this head on. I felt like there was something more profound going on. And I remember they kept asking, what's your name? What's your name? And I was getting a little frustrated with them because I'm thinking, they have it on their charts in the paperwork. Can't they remember? Don't they know what my name is? And then it finally dawned on me. They weren't asking me my name because they forgot or didn't know it. They were asking to see if I knew who I was throughout this whole ordeal. And had I lost the identity with my name on my birth certificate, which throughout the whole ordeal I did not. But it kind of dawned on me. So none of the pills were working. None of the medicines were working. I was probably getting in worse shape. Just everything's going on. You have these voices in your head, feeling severe depression, feeling like you have no hope of ever getting out of this. This is going to be the rest of your life. So they decide to resort to ECT, which is electroconvulsive therapy. Essentially, what they do is they run a voltage across your brain. Now, it wasn't as sadistic as it was back in Jerry's day. At
I
least
almost fainted when I saw one at the state hospital. It was so brutal. It was like Frankenstein's laboratory.
at least when I had this done, it was not about 1990. Actually, so just trying to think. Actually, this was probably fall of 1990, very early, late spring, fall of 1991. Sure, I get my dates mixed up here. No, I'm sorry, 1990. Yeah, fall of 1990. And what they do is they give you anesthesia, they knock you out, but they also give you a muscle relaxant. And they have to give you a muscle relaxant because when they run the current across your brain, you can have seizures, you can break bones and rip ligaments out. And they only run the current for a short amount of time, but there's quite a bit of prep work that goes in advance. It's like going in for surgery. They have to prep you, they have to give you anesthesia, they have to give you a muscle relaxant. And I remember after the very first session, I felt better. I didn't hear the voices. I felt more like myself. I felt like I could start rebuilding myself from here. I
And
mean, I
there's
still,
something very, very interesting about that with the voices, because I noticed the same thing when in the state hospital, after they had an ECT, the voices disappeared for a while, like up to 2, 3 weeks, they'd be gone. So what that points out is that, the electricity is energy. These voices are energy. They're energetic beings. Okay? So the electrical energy interfered with them. And Monroe writes about this. He said that the voices experience EEG as a lightning storm, a painful lightning storm, and it shuts them up for a while, but they come back. So giving patients physical medications to try to get rid of an energetic being doesn't work. I mean, it's like you get a magnetic field, and for medicines, physical medicines, it doesn't get rid of the magnetic field, that energetic field. These psychiatric medications don't get rid of the voices or the trauma either. All they do is sedate the person. They don't get to the cause at all.
Do you think I've heard this a bit with either shock therapy or the medications? To what extent do you think these interventions somehow placate or entertain the entities, right? Like by doing it, it actually satisfies them temporarily versus them just because that versus the individual just being unable to see them temporarily. Do
Now,
you
do you mean the medications? You're asking if the medications placate them?
yeah, like do you think either
Oh,
shock therapy or the medications somehow like satisfy the entities, like the
no,
fact
no,
that you're
it's the
harming them?
opposite. It's the opposite.
Okay.
They don't want them to take the medications. They don't want them to get any kind of treatment. What they want is the most loose, the most negative emotional energy that they could generate from that individual. And the medications interfere with their ability to do that because, like Anon said, they operate as the medications operate like tranquilizers. So they can't instill the same amount of fear or anxiety or that they can without the medications. So they don't want the person to take the medications. They'll tell them they're poison, don't take them, and that's a large. It's almost like almost every one of them at some point goes off the medications,
Mm-hmm.
and then they lapse back into a psychotic state again. And I was wondering, like, why are they doing that? Don't they know they go crazy if they do that? You know, they didn't understand that the voices are telling them, hey, these medications are toxic. They're poison. Don't take them. No,
I
no,
think
they
these
don't like the medications.
Right.
yeah, I think these entities ultimately do want to take over their target, but I think they want to keep them in the most state of fear as much as possible. That's really
Yeah.
Yeah.
some of their objectives. I
As
think the
more
entities
thinking
all have various objectives.
Yeah, yeah. And we're just thinking it's like because these medications are so harmful and because shock therapy is a form of damage, it's like, oh great, we're the host is being harmed, we'll ease off a bit. But Jerry, you're saying that's not the case, that they don't like any they don't want you to sever that connection to them at all once they've gained a foothold.
Yeah. They don't want any interference. And that's where I ran into trouble because I was interfering with what they were doing. I would experiment with, well, what if I do this? What if I do that? What if that there's a pattern. If you go to my website, jerrymarzinsky.com, you go to articles, there's a whole list of patterns, 23 patterns that they consistently run. And what I was doing was like, what can I do to upset these patterns? And that's what really pissed them off. That's why I was being threatened. That's why the electrical crackling in my office, they
Mm-hmm.
didn't want interference with what they were doing.
Now, I think the
Like,
ECT scalds them as well, even though it does some short-term damage to the patient, and continuous ECT will definitely do long-term damage as well.
yeah,
But I think that it's the ECT, it's electrical energy. I think it hurt them. It pushed them away because I just
yes.
remember my mind was very silent after the very first treatment. And the hospital staff insisted, no, you have to have 6 treatments at least. I was telling them, hey, I feel much better even after the first one. I can rebuild myself. They said, no, 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 you have to have at least six, total of 6 treatments. So I went through a total of 6 treatments. I think I think about half of them were inpatient. I was discharged. The other half was outpatient.
Did you feel any better after the sixth than you did after the first one?
I'd say no.
I
The,
was
the,
wondering that. Yeah,
the, the,
because
fir-
that
the first
doesn't.
one was such a drastic improvement. I mean, it's just the whole fact that I couldn't the voices were out of my head. I felt like I was back to my own self again. I was still rock bottom, but I felt like I could rebuild myself as a human being, try and get my life back together, trying to get on with a career and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I didn't feel any different between the first one and the sixth one. I think my short-term memory was probably a little more thrown off by having to do the additional five than just
Oh
having to
yeah,
do,
yeah.
just having to do the one.
Neurologists can find brain damage after just one.
Yeah, it's serious. The same family member I mentioned that had severe bipolar, they were very close to getting shock therapy. Luckily, they didn't. But yeah, I mean, it's fascinating to hear, and you know, both Anon, what you're saying, and Jerry, you guys, it lines up with a lot of things, both what traditional, even Catholic exorcists speak about, but also those in the spiritual community, that these entities very much are real. And yeah, there's no positivity, right? Jerry, you lay that out quite a bit, that they just want to destroy, seek and destroy, basically, and trauma seems to be the most common theme as well. And so, Anon, maybe you could speak about that a little bit. You kind of alluded to the fact that you had, you know, some unresolved stuff in your upbringing, and that no need to share anything you don't feel comfortable, but I'd love to just better understand how you see the relationship between trauma and your susceptibility to demonic attack.
Yeah, let me add one little thing here. Ouija boards,
Mm.
meth, and Ouija boards.
And
Ouija
alcohol.
boards, alcohol, and especially meth. Ouija
I'll say
boards are not toys. They're very dangerous.
Yeah,
I'll
I've
say
talked to
ex
people who were, they were playing with the Ouija board and talking to some spirit that way. The next thing they know, they start hearing that thing in their head. They should outlaw those things. They should not sell them. They're
yeah.
Turned it into a
dangerous.
game.
You
They're
know,
not a game.
I got a funny Ouija board story actually. I was like 10 and I was on a camping trip for the summer, and there was a pastor there. And all of a sudden, people were like, "Oh, Donnie, have you ever done a Ouija board?" I'm like, "No." They're like, "Oh, it's this like weird seance thing." And there's a minister talking about it. And then we go into the local town, and there's this bookstore. And they were closed, but the lady was just there, happened to be cleaning. And we showed up, and she's like, "Oh, this is so strange. Like, I shouldn't be open, but I am." And you know what? 3 days ago, we got a Ouija board. Somebody literally just donated it. And so everyone's like, "Oh, this is, meant to be." And then we get it. And the rest of my summer after using it, I thought something was watching me. And I felt the most intense fear I've ever felt in my life for months. And it seemed to go away, but it was tormenting. So I really think there is something there to that Ouija board. Yeah, because it
Well,
was.
I can guarantee you there is.
Yeah, when you look into the abyss looks back.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, so yeah, Nan, if you could maybe speak a little bit on the topic of trauma and how it relates, I'd love to get your feedback there.
Sure. As I said, I think like there's certain things that can definitely provide easier access for these entities, and that's trauma. Um, I'd also say excessive alcohol use, because some people can drink a little bit of alcohol and be fine. They can handle it. Other people cannot. You know, if somebody does have a problem with alcohol, they should certainly stay away from it altogether. But definitely the harder drugs like meth and some of the other stuff that's out there. But those are entry points for these entities. So I mean, some of my trauma, I mean, there was like death. There was a lot of drug abuse going on in my family. I kind of took the approach though when I'm dealing with all this stuff. This is what a human being has to endure as a child type of thing to be aware of what humanity has to deal with in a family situation and outside of that. There's a lot of narcissism. There was abandonment, just a whole slew of things. Some people have had it much worse in life than I did, but I found that I suppressed a lot of it. I don't think I ever dealt with it, and I think it started to froth up on its own. Or these entities were going in there and stirring it up because it was a way to generate negative emotions, that sort of thing. So trauma is a big entry point for these entities, and the trauma could have occurred during one's childhood. It could also occur during one's adulthood too. They're like shark feedings, these entities, and if your psyche is wounded, it gives them a way to kind of poke in and test to see, can I get in here? Can I enter this person or this being? So the way to resolve that is to address the trauma and There's different methods for doing that. There's various counseling methods are out there. Jerry has the MACE Energy method and the That's Alive program, which just helps address some of the trauma that we all go through. I think everybody on this planet seems to have some form of trauma built up in them as they mature and go through various stages of life. But the idea is if we can heal that trauma within ourselves, I think we'll heal the trauma within the universe.
Mm, that's very well
So
said.
getting back to, if I may, so I got out. I had the 6 ACT treatment. I was feeling much better. I was feeling okay. I can rebuild myself. I was trying to start job hunting again to get back out there. They had me on a low dose of Klonopin at the time, which is kind of like a mood stabilizer. I was seeing both a psychologist and a psychiatrist. Had a lot of codependent issues I was dealing with, trying to break away from some of that. But I wasn't telling my counselor everything. I wasn't telling her the nature of what the voices were saying. And there, one time the voices did want me to commit a crime. They wanted me to throw a brick in this particular place's window. It was actually a former place of employment type of thing, kind of getting back for revenge. And yeah, you really have to fight hard to resist this stuff because they tempt you. They tempt you severely. So then the voices started to come back. So this is approaching maybe December 1990, January 1991. But it was different this time. It was almost like I was going through some sort of hierarchy, but like one voice would come in and start telling me how worthless humanity is, how we don't deserve to exist, how we're just like flesh, blood, and bones. And it was like it was attacking me and all of humanity. And I found myself almost being like a representative against these voices. And there's times I would talk out, like, no, if nobody was around, I would talk out loud to these voices. If there were people around, I would talk inside my head to them. But they would try and make me feel so worthless. They would dig up things in my memory, like I mentioned that thing with the baiting of a worm with a hook. They would pull up the littlest things and just
Yeah.
bombard you with them to make you feel awful about yourself. I mean, if that's my sin in life, having to hook an earthworm to catch a meal, well, so be it.
I think that really speaks to the psychopathy or sociopathy of these entities. Like I've heard a lot of stories, like they'll even tormenting kids, right? They'll say something like, you didn't tell your mommy you loved her, you've hurt her, like anything to get that person's response that they want, they'll do, right? And it's very much tailored, right? So it seems like we're
Oh
dealing
yeah.
with pure. Would you say they're pure evil? Would you say they're pure psychopaths? Like, do you think they're a bit pranksters? Like, how would you define the actual nature of these entities?
That's tough to tell because there's so much out there, and since having these experiences, I've read a lot back and forth, and there's contradictions. Some say this is you're doing shadow work. Others say no, these are demons and archons out there out to get you. So it's really tough to say if this is something that we're supposed to go through, or if these are really adversarial and devilish, evil. I don't have a solid answer on that. And a lot of the
Well,
stuff I'm saying, I can talk about my experiences. The interpretation of all this stuff is entirely different. That I leave it open because I don't want to get too dogmatic with it because nobody really knows for sure. And
well, there's several different kinds. There's a specific kind that's attached to alcohol. There's another kind that's attached to meth. There's different kinds. There's kinds that are attacked to like sexual perversion. They're different ones. They're not all the same thing. And then you got ghosts and you got ghost pranksters and that kind of stuff. I mean, so there's a whole spiritual universe out there. I mean, it's like the ocean.
elementals,
Yeah, there's all kinds of stuff out there.
jinn.
Yeah.
Jinn.
Yeah, in every culture they're alluding to this, and not I want to hear your story, but it's just very interesting to get this context here. So you're somebody with an engineering background, so you're very matter of fact. Very much in the cause and
Logical,
effect.
rational for the
Yeah,
most part.
exactly. Like a materialist, I would say, in that at least in your professional life, right, you're not concerned with spiritual matters, right? So, for you to start to actually question this, I think was very cutting edge for you. I'd be curious, like, was it your religious background that you think led to you questioning, hey, maybe this isn't just a mental illness? And as well, like, were there anybody along the way that was supporting you in this line of thinking? Because, pretty much everyone just says, just take the drugs and take the, do what we say. And it sounds like, even though you did resist a lot of the narrative. So, like, what do you think drove that?
I think deep inside, I did have a very strong faith, and I had to be open to the fact that this could be a true religious experience. But then I'm questioning it and saying, who am I to have such an experience, though, too? Like, because you have these entities making your self-worth going to almost zero, and at the same time, you're having this very profound experience.
Mm-hmm.
And one conjecture or theory is that these entities attack those that are a future threat to them. Like there could be some sort of, I might say, temporal warfare going on out there a little bit. I don't have solid answers. But all that I can say is, there's something going on beyond the veil, but I don't quite know what it is. And a lot of people are saying, something's coming to a head over these years. There's some sort of something's brewing out there.
Mm-hmm.
Something's going on. I don't know 100% sure what it is, so I try and keep an open mind when approaching this stuff.
Yeah.
But during that time period, like winter 1991, spring of 1991, went through a whole different series of various adversaries. And like one of them would say how worthless humanity is. They don't deserve to exist as a species. And I would find myself defending against them. Like I would say, yes, some human beings are awful. They're ignorant, but some human beings are full of love
Mm-hmm.
and compassion. And I said, you don't condemn an entire species based on the actions of a few. So I was arguing against them. I was becoming like a defense attorney,
Yeah.
and they were trying to turn me against humanity too, in a sense. And I was trying to fight that. Like I was saying, no, you can't. There are some good people out there. Yes, there are some horrible people out there, but there's some good people out there too. And I felt like it was different adversaries I was facing because the vocabulary they use seemed to change. Like I was going up some sort of chain of intelligence here or some
Mm-hmm.
sort of managerial hierarchy. But I remember one of them started saying how humanity is just blood, bones, flesh. When you die, you're eaten by worms and bacteria. There's nothing to your body. You stink all the time and everything. I mean, they really didn't like human beings. And I would argue against them. I would say, look, I said, you're blaming me for our form. I said, don't put that on my shoulders. Take that to God. I mean, the divine hand's the one that created it, our form and shape, or we were forced into it. I said, take your arguments to God, not to me. And it was really interesting because this adversarial attack backed off like within 2 weeks. All the other attacks went on for a couple of months and continued going on in the background. But this one backed off almost immediately. And that was a bit of an epiphany for me because I said, I can defend against these attacks. And I think what it was, my argument was so strong that they didn't have a case against it. Their case fell apart. And that's basically what happened. And they had to back off right away. And if you could refer to these entities as archons, well, they're basically gaslighting me because, supposedly the archons made our bodies or our forms. And here it is, this entities saying how horrible our form is. And it's like, well, if these are the entities that made our form, that's a little bit of gaslighting or rejection. I mean, that's psychotic behavior in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember some of the times when they were saying how, as a species, humans didn't deserve to live, that we didn't deserve to continue our existence. I mean, it's almost like there's a cosmic battle going on in my head,
Yeah.
like an Armageddon in a sense. Like there's some sort of battlefront going on. I don't know if I had like various aeons and archons in my head going back and forth, carrying out some sort of cosmic battle or what. But I remember at times, actually, scenes were flashing before my eyes of various wars and battles and just violence throughout history. I mean, it's like watching, it really was like watching a cinematographic display, different screens back and forth. And this is like, 1991. A lot of the high tech stuff wasn't even invented yet. But I kept defending myself and humanity against them, saying, look, yeah, we're not perfect, but we're trying. So I went through all these various adversarial attacks and trials and tribulations, and it's approaching fall of 1991 now, and I'm at rock bottom. I mean, I'm dealing with this diagnosis of affective schizophrenic disorder, or schizoaffective disorder was the actual diagnosis put down for the insurance code. My income that year was below poverty level. I'm unemployed. I had a credit card, so that's how I was basically paying for food with cash on that, or cash advances. I was paying for health care on that. I was maxing out my credit card. It was basically how I was trying to survive. And I was losing my will to live because something kept telling me that human beings are just random chance the way they were formed. They're just molecules and chemistry. There is no soul. There is no spirit. You're just material forms. You're just beasts. And plus, I was dealing with almost a year of all these attacks and torments, and with the stigma of having schizophrenic disorder as a diagnosis, I was feeling like I had no future in this world, that my life was over the way I looked at it. I had no hope. And this entity started telling me, or the entities kept saying that, God does not exist, give it up. And this is what was keeping me going, was my faith that, this might be something real. Maybe there really are demons in this world. Because I wasn't into demons or even really believed in them prior to this. Yeah, you hear the stories in the Bible, you see the horror movies, but I never really thought that they were real in a sense. I thought it was more of a figurative thing.
Well, they react to the 23rd Psalm like worms thrown on a hot frying pan. They're anti-religious consistently. So I found that to be odd.
And I mean, all this stuff started when I started reading the Bible on my own for the first time after graduating college. I had some time on my hands. I wanted to see what it said for myself without any middlemen. That's when a lot of this stuff kind of started. And you could call it a dark night of the soul. I mean, it was definitely an existential crisis, what was occurring. So the final torment was very intense. It was saying that God does not exist. Give it up. Your faith is stupid. It's worthless. You don't deserve to exist. Kill yourself. Go away. So I started to do the only thing I had left in me was I started praying to God, or the highest essence of what I thought God was. I said, God, give me a sign. I said, I don't know if this is just pure madness in my head. I don't know if this is a religious experience. I know something much more profound is going on, but I need a sign from you. Because if you want me to continue this world, I need to know that what I'm going through is not just pure mental illness, that there's something to it, more to it. This is not just my mind playing tricks on me. I prayed as intensely as I ever did in my life, I think. So after about 2 weeks, the most intense thing, I woke up one night about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and something very profound occurred. I had a hallucination or a vision. So prior to this point, all the hallucinations I had were audio. You could say it was audio hallucinations. I wasn't actually seeing anything. Now, there might have been paranormal activity occurring in my household. I just wasn't focused on it, or I don't quite remember it. But there was a lot of stuff going on at the time. I remember it just didn't seem weird synchronicities were occurring, a lot of different things. And I've heard that synchronicities can be a good thing. I've heard synchronicities can be a bad thing. So it's a lot of controversy out there how to interpret all this stuff. Praying to God to give me a sign. I didn't care what the sign was. I didn't want to specify it because then I felt like I was kind of manipulating. I want to let God decide what the sign was going to be. If a Bible had shown up in my mailbox by mistake, I would have accepted that as a sign. If a priest had knocked on my door, I would have accepted that as a sign. It didn't matter to me. I just needed something definitive, or else I was done with this world. I couldn't go on like this. And so after the 2 weeks of the most intense praying, I woke up in the morning and had a hallucination, a visual hallucination. Now we can do share screen now. and I can show you and your audience what it is that I actually saw or encountered.
Yes, please. Let's.
Now, is that something I have to do at this end?
Well,
No.
let's see
Good.
what's occurring here.
Just give me a second.
Okay. Looks like it's working.
Yep, we're great on my side too.
Okay. So this is the interior of my room at the time. There's a door there, closets on the right, a little shelf, built-in shelf thing on the left there. So I woke up after 2 weeks of the most intense praying. I woke up about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning with a feeling that there was a presence in my room. I mean, I could just feel this energy. It was so strong. I'm looking around. I didn't see anything. Do you see a square now
Mm-hmm.
in
Yeah.
this in the slideshow?
Yep.
This was the ceiling light fixture in my room. So I'm lying on my back, looking up, and the ceiling light fixture was there. And I swear there was something in my room with me. It's just a very intense presence, very strong. Looking around, I don't see anything. I don't hear anything. And then all of a sudden, I start to see this like grayish smoke-like substance start to enter the room. Can you see the slides changing okay?
Yes, I can.
Okay. Now, at first, I thought that there's an electrical fire occurring in my light fixture, and I was ready to run out of the room. But I realized this isn't occurring where the wires go into the light fixture. And the smoke or fog or darkish grayish silverish cloud was not coming in from the ceiling. It actually started to enter my room in a plane about 6 inches or a foot below the ceiling.
Hmm.
And then it dawned on me, oh, great, I'm having a visual hallucination. I was dealing with the diagnosis of a schizophrenic disorder, but I was aware of this. And I was aware this is probably a hallucination. So part of me is thinking, oh, great, my condition's getting worse. There's no hope. I'm never going to get out of this. The other part of me, the observer, was like, okay, let me see where my schizophrenic brain is going to take me. Let me see what it's going to show me. I want to see where this goes. I was part curious, this is a little bit of scientific experience. So more and more of this cloud-like substance is entering my room. I'm lying on my back. I'm not really, I'm not really scared at this point. I'm more curious, but I knew this is not normal reality. Now, this substance moved the way food coloring would move through a glass of water. Like you ever drop food coloring in a glass of water, how it kind of spreads in a weird manner. That's the way it was moving. I don't know if it was sentient in itself, but more and more of this grayish cloud like substance is coming in the room. It's like a fog. It's kind of grayish, darkish, silverish. Seeing more and more of it. I'm just lying on my back watching it, looking up, very curious. And all of a sudden I see like a portal start to open up in the middle of this cloud. And I realized that this cloud seems to be coming out of the portal. I could see its essence coming out around the inside circumference of this oblong portal that's forming in my room. And the portal's growing more and more. This fog-like substance is continuing to enter my room. And it was kind of an oblong oval shape. And I'm looking and it's very dark. I really can't see anything in there. It's getting bigger and bigger. And then all of a sudden, whoosh, I see these two snake-like serpentine movements from the bottom to top of the portal. But they're in that portal area. They're not in my room yet. They're in the portal. I was like, whoa, what is this? What is going on with my mind here? What is this? So I see these two tails move, and then they seem to converge like into one tail. So I wasn't sure if I was seeing the tail of several entities or if I was seeing one entity that had like a split tail. But I just remember it was very serpentine looking. It was grayish on the underbelly, and the sides of it were like a dark, glossy black scales, is a way of describing it. And I remember thinking, whatever this thing is, I'm glad it's in this portal and not in my room.
Yeah.
But that thought was premature. And again, I'm dealing with cognitive dissonance here. It's like, okay, is this just a visual hallucination, or is this really happening in my room? I don't know. I'm interpreting it. I wasn't sure how to interpret this. I'm on the fence. Then there was so much of the fog or cloud-like essence in the room, I couldn't see the portal anymore. It was kind of covered, but I knew the portal was still there, or the gateway, whatever you want to call it. Then all of a sudden, I see these serpentine movements in the cloud that formed in my room. And I realized this entity was coming through that portal or gateway and entering this cloud. I could see the serpentine movements in the cloud as it's moving around. I'm like, whoa, what is going on here? So I'm still lying on my back, just watching this whole thing occurring, seeing the serpentine movements kind of weaving in and out of the cloud. And then for a few moments there, I didn't see any of the serpentine movements, but I knew it was in there. The cloud was a little bit bigger. And all of a sudden, it pops out. Its head pops out. Now, I was expecting this thing to have a reptilian or snake-like head to it. After all, it's a snake. My mind's playing tricks on me. It comes out with a mammalian face on it. It looked lion, dog, or monkey-like from the side. I remember it had a mane, and it had like a seam running down the side of it. I could see its whiskers. I could see like stubble. So it comes out of the cloud. It goes from left to right, and I'm curious, not overly frightened at this point. I found these images online with the last 4 or 5 years or so, and I realized this is exactly what I saw. Now, this is an entity referred to as Chnubis in ancient Egypt. So that means humanity was aware of this entity at least 4,000 years ago. The Gnostics referred to it as the Demiurgos, uh, Yaldabaoth, referred to as Abraxas as well. But if you notice in this image, this is an amulet, I think from the, I think second or third century, perhaps even fourth century. But you see there's like a seam down the side, like it's a split,
Mm-hmm.
and that goes into one. And that's exactly what I saw. What was a split down the side or seam of this thing. Now, when this entity first popped out, I started kind of laughing to myself because I'm thinking, okay, my mind's creating weird animals that have a snake-like body and a lion-like head. It's like, what else is going to pop out of this cloud? Like a frog on a duck's body or something? And here are some more amulets depicting this entity referred to as Chnubis. That's the oldest name of it. Again, the Gnostics referred to as Yaldabaoth or Abraxas. It also goes by Samiel. I think the chief archon. There's a few other names that it goes by. But even this amulet, you can see there's a little seam running down its side. Like there's a split there.
And the mane.
And the mane. And most snakes don't have a. I've never seen a snake with a seam running down the side of its body, but this entity had one.
Hmm.
So I think what it is this entity might have two tails, but they can merge together and act as one. Again, that's conjecture because I really don't know for sure. I'm just describing what it is that I saw.
Yeah. Wow.
So, so then it turns and faces me head on, and now the face is very lion-like. Its left eye appeared to be kind of scratched. It might have even been blind in his left eye, like he'd been in a few cat fights.
Okay.
It kind of looked like a mangy cat, is a good way of describing it. But I could see it in such detail. I could see whiskers. I could see imperfections on its face. I could see stubble. I could see its snout and its eyes and its mane. Now, it didn't look it didn't look terribly scary to me at this point in time. For some reason, to me, I wasn't that frightened or scared. I was more curious where this was going.
Mm-hmm.
So it comes at me head on. Like, okay, I knew this was not normal reality. Wasn't sure if this was just a hallucination or if these things actually materialized in my room. But I knew something was not right here with reality. I knew that much. This was the simulation glitching here. Then all of a sudden the face changes, the most horrible thing you could possibly think of. It became very hobgoblin-like. I remember its face was very grayish and pruned. It was wrinkled. It seemed to come at me with almost like a howling, screaming expression, like it was about to devour me or devour my soul. It looked like a combination of like maybe lizard-like and old man or old hag of decay. I just remember every cell in my body was in an intense state of fright and horror at this point. I mean, I remember every one of my hairs just stood up on end, like goosebumps. And I thought this was the end of my existence because I wasn't sure if this was just a visual hallucination that was going to go away or if this thing was really in my room coming after me. And I remember how I felt, like just this terrible state of fright and horror. And if this was the end of my existence, I didn't want to die that way. I had nothing else to lose. So I said, I'm not going to go out this way if this thing's coming to eat me or destroy me. So what I did is I changed my state of mind. I lowered my ego. I just projected love onto it. I figured I was interpreting this thing as being very evil. And I figured if this thing was trying to elicit the most amount of fright or terror out of me, I wasn't going to give it that satisfaction. So I just projected love onto it. I said, okay, you're coming to destroy me. I don't care. I'm going to love you. Now, I don't know if that was necessarily my own thought or if that was put in my mind from a higher thought or a higher essence. But I just felt like this is it. I'm dead. I'm going to die. And I projected love upon it. And the next thing I know, the entity seemed to disappear, vaporize, or pulverized.
Now
Just
that happens with the voices too. If the patient can project love onto the voices, they act like scalded dogs. They can't deal with it. So it's consistent with what I've experienced also.
so all of a sudden this entity is gone. And I'm like saying to myself, I think I'm still alive. I think I'm still here. The cloud was still there, although it was starting to dissipate. I knew I was still in my room because the square ceiling light fixture was serving as a datum. That was my constant. I felt like this ordeal was over. I'm still alive. What's going on here? Next thing I know, there's a whole different entity hovering overhead. Now, where the previous entity had come in and vaporized or disappeared or pulverized was kind of about 6 o'clock in my field of vision. This entity was in the upper right-hand corner, more about 1 or 2 o'clock. And this entity had it had 3 or 4 pairs of what could be interpreted as wings. They looked like discharges of energy, almost like solar flares or solar coronas. It, the what was what I interpreted as wings was bronzes yellowish in color, but very like illuminated. And they were fluttering back and forth. Like these wings were moving, and sometimes it'd go over its face, sometimes it would move in different directions. The face is itself sheer, undescribable beauty. Now, I'm not an artist, I'm an engineer, so I drew it with kind of a white mask, porcelain face, but that's kind of what I saw. But just imagine this face with sheer beauty. I wasn't super scared at this point because I felt like this was something different, but its eyes were closed. So it's up there, hovering overhead. The wings are fluttering. Its eyes are closed. It's sheer beauty, undescribable beauty. And I felt like this was not of this reality. This is something divine or of a different realm. I was ready to get up and run out of my room just out of respect for this thing because I felt like I'm a mere mortal. I'm a human being. I shouldn't be seeing this stuff. The beauty was undescribable.
Wow.
It looked it looked androgynous, but I felt like it was of a feminine nature. But I mentioned its eyes were closed, and I realized that this I was aware of this entity before it was aware that I was there. Because I'm just like looking at it. Like I don't think it was aware of where I was, who I was, or where it was. So I'm just staring at it. And now this is stuff I've come across the internet in the last few years. And keep in mind, I had this experience back in 1991. There was no internet back then.
Right.
You could just find images. But of course, this image in the lower left-hand corner is of what they I think they refer to as a seraph or I think seraphim
Seraphim?
for
Yep.
yeah, seraphim for plural. Could have been what they describe as a cherubim. I don't know if my pronunciation is correct. And as of course, the internet kind of intermingles them. Sometimes it gives the same name for the different views, but this is definitely what it looked like in the lower left-hand corner. It seemed to have these like floating like wings. It was just kind of a face there. And I have some other images in there what it could be interpreted as kind of looking like. But I remember it was kind of white as porcelain, illuminated, very 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 beautiful, intense beauty. I was in awe of how beautiful this thing was. The next I know, its eyes opened and it's looking at me in sheer beauty. We're just staring at each other. And like I didn't know what was going to happen next. I'm thinking that previous entity came in and turned into something horrible. This entity is probably going to do the same thing. It looks beautiful now, but it's going to turn into something horrible and come at me. So we're just lying there. I'm just lying there. We're staring at each other. And with both these entities, I felt like there was a connection to them, almost like they're both inside of me, but beyond me simultaneously. So I'm just lying there. I'm not sure what's going to happen next. This felt like several minutes of time where this thing's just floating, looking at me. I don't know if it was judging me. I don't know if it was trying to think of where it was. I don't quite know what was going on. But then after a few moments of it just staring at me and we're staring at each other, all of a sudden it smiles. And I remember the smile, it was a smile of grace. I could even see dimples form in its cheeks as it smiled. And the wings are still kind of fluttering back and forth. The cloud is dissipating. And with that smile, all of a sudden, I felt this projection of love come from it. It was like a wave just coming from it. But bam, it was love, euphoria, bliss, undescribable ecstasy. It's almost like it was telling me that everything's going to be okay. I don't know if it had judged my soul and found me to be worthy. I don't know if I had somehow freed it by destroying that previous entity and it was thanking me. But I remember as this entity is projecting love, bliss, ecstasy upon me, I started to have an out of body experience. Felt myself rising out of my body, like my soul was coming out of my body. I was starting to merge with this entity. We were both becoming one in a sense. It was a most beautiful and exhilarating experience I ever had in my life. And this entity starts to rise in reverse to go through the portal that had opened up earlier in that evening or that early morning. And just as I'm about to 100% merge with this entity, like we're becoming one, I don't know if that's what they refer to as a hieros gammas, but just as I'm merging with this entity and we're both about to cross into that portal gateway together as one being, I was put back to sleep. It wasn't like I fell back to sleep. Like I felt like I was deliberately put to sleep, but everything went gray. And then dark. I was out. Now I woke up the next morning, probably about, oh, I don't know, somewhere between 7 to 8 a.m. I was in a state of religious shock. It's like, what just happened? What had occurred? But all that I know is here it was previously, something was telling me that God does not exist, give it up. I prayed to God for a sign. I didn't care what the sign was, and this is what occurs. This basically negated everything those negative voices were saying to me. And it proved to me that this was more than just madness. This was a profound spiritual battle that was going on here. I did tell my counselor about this because I was afraid for two reasons. One, that I was going to be put on more extreme antipsychotic drugs. I was just on a low dose of Klonopin at the time, which is basically a mood stabilizer. And I hated being on any medication. I wanted to feel like I was in control of my own faculties. And the second reason I didn't tell my counselor is I didn't want her just telling me, oh, it's just a hallucination, ignore it. Because this was giving me the groundwork, the base to start rebuilding myself. It was almost like something was trying to make me lose all my faith in God and have this experience, which basically 100% reinforced my faith in God, or however you want to define God, who knows. But this is what they refer to as crossing over from faith and into gnosis, where you've had a divine experience like this. Now, I know you're aware of Gnosticism from some of your other prior YouTube videos. I had no knowledge of Gnosticism until 2020. So I didn't know what this stuff was. I didn't come across any of these images until recent years. Now, I'm going to read something from the Non-Commodity Library, which is the group of Gnostic scriptures or texts found about the mid 1940s. And this is from the Apocrypha of John. And they believe this was written probably about just a little prior to 185 of the Common Era. Here's a paragraph out of it. And it talks about Sophia and this entity named Yaldabaoth. So, quote, and when she saw the consequences of her desire, it changed into a form of a lion-faced serpent, and its eyes were like lightning fires which flash. She cast it away from her, outside that place, that no one of the immortal ones might see it, for she had created it in ignorance. And she surrounded it with a luminous cloud, and she placed a throne in the middle of the cloud, that no one might see it except the Holy Spirit, who is called the Mother of the Living, and she called his name Yaldabaoth. And Yaldabaoth has several etymological definitions, such as child of chaos, and there's a few other things. But here it is. I see this lion-like faced entity come out of a cloud, has a serpentine body, had no idea or knowledge of what it was. And then here this is coming out of the Nag Hammadi Library, a text written around the time of Christ. So the question is, okay, does it just mean every schizophrenic sees these entities, or is there something to it? And as Jerry mentioned, that these hallucinations should be random. There's a few things that you have to know from a scientific aspect of this. Why did this cloud have to appear first? Why did a gateway have or portal have to open up for this entity to enter the room? If it was supposed to be just a visual hallucination, it should have just appeared. But that's not what occurred. It had to somehow create a way to enter our realm. Now, that was a glitch in the matrix. That was a glitch in the simulation of our reality. So I don't know if this entity can create those portals or gateways, or if it knows how to navigate them. Something else could be creating them. I don't know if I was facing the head archon himself, Yaldabaoth, Samuel, Yaldabaoth, whatever names you want to use for him, Abraxas. I don't know if there's several entities that exist, several species of them. I don't know if I destroyed Yaldabaoth with that cosmic encounter that I had. And maybe we're seeing all this chaos in the world because of there's like a fight going on among the reigning archons for power or dominance. I don't have 100% of the answers. I just know I had this experience back in 1991, and then I'm encountering and reading this stuff and realizing there's more than meets the eye here. That like our definition of demons and archons are real. It's just what we call them. I mean, some people call them interdimensional beings. It just depends on your approach. But what this tells us is that humanity has a place to play in the cosmos. Our existence is significant. We're just not quite sure what it is.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you want to defeat these archons and demons, we got to implement more of the positive aspects of our humanity into everyday life, more healthy love, more compassion, more gratitude, more forgiveness. We've got to balance our egos so that we're not all acting like narcissistic jerks all the time.
Yeah.
Well said.
And now Gnosticism, as you know, by some it's the Orthodox, it's a heretic, it's a heresy.
Yep.
But I'm going to read you something from the New Testament, which is very interesting. This is a little bit of Gnosticism having found its way into the New Testament. Now, this is in John, Book of John, 12:31, 14:30, and 16:11. But in those sections, John refers to the archon of this world, or the ruler of this world, or the prince of this world, or Satan, the ruler of this world, depending which biblical version or interpretation that you have. But here's the thing. John is not saying that the ultimate God is the ruler of this world. He's saying that there's something's different that rules this world. I mean, the way our Orthodox upbringing presents it, that God is the ultimate God is the creator of this world, this universe. And here John is saying, even in the New Testament, no, there's a prince of this world. There's something else going on. I thought the highest God would rule this world. What's this about? Some sort of ruler or archon of this world? So there's something going on here, and I don't pretend to 100% know everything. There's various conjectures, interpretations out there, and one has to be careful with dogmatism because dogmatism may not be correct. But I think just the fact that having endured this experience, it definitely gave proof to me that our soul and psyche are real, that God does exist, however we choose to define him, her, or it. And, God is an infinite source. And it doesn't make sense that there should be a finite amount of pathways to this infinite source.
Mm-hmm.
An infinite source should have infinite pathways to accessing it. So I don't think any one religion quite has it right, all the goodness, or has it accurately, but it's at least a way to at least start our approach or access to trying to encounter the mind of God, to put more benevolence into this world or this universe. Because
Yeah.
I mean, come on, our material world, it's vicious for some.
Yeah.
I mean, look at nature, right? Nature is beautiful, but at the same time, it's vicious. It chomps on itself for energy and sustenance. It eats itself. I mean, what a crazy way to make a world, right? Where other creatures, other sculptures have to eat other sculptures to maintain their existence. I mean, there's some madness going on.
Yeah,
So,
it's incredibly well said. I just want to touch on a few points there. Is you're speaking my language, Anon, and I struggle. I On this podcast we kind of trigger everybody equally. We trigger the Christians, because I'm a New Age Wiccan to Christians, and then Gnostics. I'm not a true OG Gnostic. But I mean, for me, I totally agree with you that I think I feel as if the religions there's like an actual truth, and that truth has been fragmented, and bits and pieces have been given to different religions. Like, so for example, all my friends here are Christian, and they live some of the best blessed lives. They're family oriented, community oriented, always seeking to better themselves and be humble, which I think like living that way is incredible. But as well, like, Buddhic and Eastern philosophies around egoic separation, understanding the nature of the ego and having to separate from that and practice presence has been one of the most transformational experiences for me. And so, I'm caught in this quagmire where I see these truths, right? And I don't want to just be wishy-washy about it, but, I think kind of like a scientist, we need to test these hypotheses and see how they stand up against the evidence, right? Versus just kind of taking on an orthodoxy, right? And I have no beef with people who are super religious or have a denomination, right? Like I love people in general, but and I see these truths coming through different ways, and it's, I guess if I'm hearing you correctly, that's been your conclusion as well.
yeah, it's about balance. It really is because we really don't know what's going on, but we know something's going on. And I think I've taken the approach that, hey, you're free to do what you want as long as you're not trampling on the freedom of others. That's really, I think, what it comes down to. It sounds like you're seeking, you're searching. I find myself these days, I'm gearing more towards being kind of a hermetic Gnostic, you might say.
Yep.
Um, a few years down the road, I could be something entirely different. I mean, I dabble in all the different aspects, reading up some of the great philosophers and so-called magicians like Agrippa and some of the other ones from history. Gareth Knight is a more recent so-called magician, and he's done a lot of books on some of this stuff. But the thing with these entities, I think sometimes too, some of these entities are like thoroughbred racehorses. And if it's your first time on a horse, you don't get on a thoroughbred racehorse. It will buck, kick, and kill you. You need to start gently with some of this stuff. And maybe we shouldn't even be dabbling in this stuff at all. And it's not like I went looking for the occult. I'd say it kind of found me. And if you say the word occult, everyone goes, woo, oh, it's bad. No, there can be bad occult, there can be good occult. Just like with Wicca and New Age stuff, there's good Wicca and bad New Age stuff. You got to apply the sort of discernment, and that means you really have to judge: am I still being ethical in the path that I'm going here? Have I crossed the line? Is my ego out of balance?
Mm-hmm.
Am I going beyond that threshold of being too narcissistic type of thing? I'm making this too much about me and not enough about others. So it really is about balance.
Yeah,
But
and it's intent, right?
intent too. Well, we can have bad thoughts. There's a whole difference between having bad thoughts and acting upon them. I think the idea is you have too many bad thoughts. You definitely want to look into that because you don't want them to progress into something worse. I mean, think of the road rage as a perfect example. Think how many people get themselves lost in road rage. Somebody cuts them off in traffic. They have to go and retaliate. It just progresses.
Yeah.
And if something is illuminated or has self-knowledge of themselves, they realize, wait a second, I don't need to get into this. The person cut me off. I'll let it go. I'm going to move on in my life because I got bigger plans, better things to do.
Hmm.
And that's know thyself. It is such a common thing. Being aware of where your thoughts are going, what you're doing. People take any personal attack as such an affront to their self-worth, and their ego is hurt. And it's really not a big deal in the grand scheme of things. So what if somebody has somehow offended you with cutting you off in traffic? Do you really need to react the way some people do? So anyhow, I'm going to circle back to what Jerry brought into this, the fact that if you can get rid of these voices or the negative voices, you'll be able to get your life back together. And the medications are not necessarily the best way to go, especially for the long term. Short term, yes. But there are other methods that work for getting rid of the voices, such as the MACE Energy method, the That's a Lie program. I face these entities head on. And I got to tell you, I came through beat up, banged up, scarred, traumatized. But I can look back now because this was almost 3 decades ago and kind of study it and see it for what it was. It definitely was a profound spiritual experience. It was probably a cosmic awakening. There's definitely something going on. There's definitely something to demons and archons. We just have to, as human beings, we have to work on ourselves. We really do. We have to raise our consciousness to a higher state, and that's what the religious models give us. They give us a method to raise our consciousness to a higher state. And depending on one's cultural background, the Eastern religions may work better for them. If they're from the Asian regions, Buddhism, some of the Hinduism, Taoism, a whole bunch out there. The Western religious experiences, more of the Abrahamic religions, the desert religions as they call them, basing off of Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. And even those kind of branch off in different directions. So, religion's a model to work with to access the mind of God and the higher realms. Pick the one that works for you. Pick the one that resonates for you. But you have to apply the sort of discernment to make sure you're not harming others or yourself in the process.
Hmm.
Well, that's true. You have to get on a positive spiritual path and stay there. The other thing people need to realize is not every thought that enters their mind belongs to them because it appears that it's in your head. It doesn't come from you. Um, Swedenborg says you don't have any thoughts. They either come in from heaven or hell. You're the one who experiences them, and you're the one who gives them energy. So
Yeah,
if you concentrate on a thought, you're giving it energy. You put your attention on a thought, you're giving it energy.
for
You
sure.
either put your thoughts on energy on bad thoughts or good thoughts. Whatever you put your energy on, that's what's going to grow.
Yeah, and just being able to, like, even for 5 minutes a day, meditate and just observe your thoughts without reacting, right? Don't even have to try to be without thought. Just observe your thoughts and create a little space where psychologically, whatever you want to say is like, I'm just witnessing these thoughts. I'm observing, right? They're not I'm not reacting. They're not me. I think for me has been very profound, right? Because it's that seems to be the how it works, right? Like, we have an ego, and then we get these thoughts, then we emotionally react and make it personal, right? Like, that's my thought, that's my trauma, and then that starts the cycle. Whereas if we can create that separation where, exactly as you said, Jerry, like, these might not be our thoughts, it can be very helpful. Anon, what do you think on the topic?
I think the objective is to develop a healthy ego. You don't want an ego that's too overinflated. You don't want an ego that's underinflated either. And then that's where balance comes into play. And we talk about, you see all the science out there even saying this world is a simulation, this reality isn't real that we live in. But yeah, but we still got to dwell in it. We still have to participate in it. So I don't know if this reality that we're dwelling in, I don't know if it's a playground, a school, a prison, a jail, a boot camp, an experiment. It could be a laboratory, it could be a farm. Nobody knows for sure. And I don't think the objective is to escape the matrix. I think the objective is let's rewrite the code of the matrix. Let's make it a little bit better than the way it is. And that's where applying the positive aspects of healthy love, compassion, forgiveness, gratitude, as much as we can, that's what helps rewrite the code of the matrix. Because some religious and esoteric approaches are that we are actually co-creators with the universe. Yeah, the universe is there, but we're writing it too as we go along.
Yes.
So if we start those practices of being more mindful, being more self-aware of ourselves, I think it'll help to kind of rewrite the code in the universe itself and improve the human condition essentially.
Yeah, and that's been a big topic on this podcast is that for me, I don't pretend to know everything, but it seems like the nature of reality is consciousness. Consciousness is fundamental in some capacity. And, as above so below. In the hermetic principles, I see this all the time in my own being. Like when I'm triggered, I go out into the external world and I will resonate with that. Like people will come into my life. I'll get a phone call out of the blue. If I'm angry, it's a resonant energy. And the opposite is true, right? When I practice like relieving trauma and being at a higher vibration, if you will, or content, or whatever you want to call it, the outer world reflects that. Like it seemingly with ease. They call it a flow state where things come into my life, an old friend, a chance encounter, you meet somebody out of the blue who just changes your life and lifts you up, and it seems so tied to our consciousness. And some people
Yes.
chop it away as just, oh, this is your reticular activation system. Like you're just focused on good things so that you see it that way. The same way like, oh, you just bought a VW Beetle, so you see Beetles. And I don't see it that way. I think it's much more profound. I think our inner state reflects the outer world is in many respects a mirror of our inner world. Not totally. It seems like there is a collective element to this, as you say, Anon, but that's been my conclusion. But yeah, I'd love to hear both of your guys' view just based off your experiences. Like, how do you see the nature of reality? What are some of the conclusions you've come to as well?
Well, I think we create our own reality, by what you think and feel. Like you said, you know, if you're right with God and you're on the right path, then things kind of flow your way. You know, if you're angry and you're resentful, and then things start closing in on you. So bad things start happening. You know?
Mm-hmm.
So you attract to what your mental state is. So schizophrenics don't attract good stuff. They get in a lot of trouble. The prison is full of them.
Those
Yeah.
entities are trying to amplify those negative emotions too.
Oh
So
yeah.
I
So
think some of those entities may trigger it in their targets, or the targets have a little bit of it, and they come in and start amplifying it by getting through those fissures or cracks in their psyche.
that's exactly right. Or if you get pissed off at something, they come around, they pour more gasoline on the fire.
Yeah.
Like, oh, you shouldn't let him get away with that. Go punch him in the face or ram his car or kick in his door. Or, you know, they're constantly trying to egg you on, and all of us are under attack by these things. It's not just the schizophrenics. It's much more obvious with the
Yeah.
schizophrenics, but we're all under attack with them. Sherry says every negative thought that you have comes from the dark side.
And that's, when they tempt you to do these bad things, it's you're almost seeking revenge. That's where forgiveness comes into play. You don't want to be a doormat in life by any means, but again, it's a little bit of balance. It's
Yeah.
forgiving where the situations are appropriate and having gratitude for where you can. It's those positive emotions that these entities do not like.
Mm-hmm. I
No,
I totally
they don't
agree.
like they don't like you to be happy. They don't like relationships. They'll try to break up relationships. They'll try to break up families. They'll tell the man that the wife is cheating on him and the woman that the husband's cheating on him. They especially hate children,
They don't
which
like
is
humanity.
Yeah.
yeah. which is
Yeah.
especially scary given in the United States that the government is one of the biggest child trafficking entities on the planet right now, the United States government.
Hmm.
They've lost track of what, like 85,000 kids that came across that border. They have no idea where they went. There's no criteria.
Somebody
All
knows.
they have to do is have an address. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree, and that's where my Christian background gets tingly because I find in a lot of Eastern tradition there is this like moral relativism and lack of willingness to call out evil and abuse. Saying like, oh, it's just kind of relativistic, whereas that to me, I think Christians, like the Christian worldview, resonates with me a lot, especially with child harm, and there's clear evil in the world, right? And
Yes.
when the Bible says like principalities, of wickedness in high places, and we see how the world is controlled, I kind of put it as a check mark for the Christian worldview. Whereas so yeah, I know you guys are very like non-orthodox in that respect, but do you guys like Anon? Obviously, from what you've said, you see a lot of background or common themes within the Bible, but still, would you like? Where do you come across? Like, would you not identify with Christ or with Christianity? Like, would you say you're more hermetic Gnostic? Yeah, I would
Well,
just be curious.
yeah, I mean, I dabble in all. I keep an open mind. I mean, I'll still go to a Roman Catholic Mass. I have no problem sitting there. I may not
Yeah.
agree with everything that's being said, but I get something out of it. And there's some views that, from the Hermetic aspect, is that that's a repeating individual character that repeats through history. So some views on it is that Christ actually was Hermes, a return of Hermes
Hmm.
in a sense too. I don't think following a Hermetic approach means that you're necessarily negating your Christian background, because keep in mind, it was my faith, which is built upon Judaic and Christian ideas from the Bible, is what got me through my schizophrenic experience.
Hmm.
I mean, I've had people tell me, "Oh, you need to find Jesus more so," and I don't get into an argument with that. I choose my battles because
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
like, but it was my strong faith in a Christian belief that got me through it. Now, what Christ is or was or is not, who really knows?
yeah,
And I think it's up to each individual to decide how they want to follow that. But
yeah,
because you can have somebody who's an atheist, but if they still are ethical and kind and considerate, are they going to be sent to hell for damnation for not believing in Christ? I don't think so.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's what got me out of Christianity. Is I was like basically in a Christian cult when I was like 19, and then I met all these amazing people in Thailand, and they were some of the most beautiful, loving, honest, nurturing, caring people that I've ever met. Like, there's no way that these people are going to hell, and I'm not, because they're way better than I am. And yeah, I mean, it's tough, but then at the same time, like Jerry, there seems to be a divinity in this Christ story. Like just the concept of forgiveness, it breaks all the spells. Like harboring resentment, anger. Being able to let it go. An eye for eye makes the whole world blind. This type of thing, right? Like Christ broke this pattern of abuse and trauma and gets us to focus on love, which I think is a higher order energy. So, like for me, this story is very profound. If it's not literally true, it's deeply spiritually true.
Well, the Judaic culture at the time, they were looking for a Messiah, and a Messiah kind of meant a kind of military leader
Yeah.
in that time. And there were probably a dozen of them that came forth that would create these armies to go against the Romans, and they would be so slaughtered and defeated. But Christ's approach was different because he wasn't coming from a military approach to it, to attack, attack, attack. His was kind of more peace and make friends with your enemies, which kind of contradicted what the Jews of the time were really looking for in a Messiah. We really don't know what's going on, but hence the mystery.
Yeah.
But if you can embrace the mystery, it's the mystery is supposed to help improve who we are as individuals, to help us grow, to raise our consciousness to a higher state, to be improve world conditions, to be better human beings, to work on ourselves. I mean, it's the whole gamut of things out there. But I guess what I find in a nutshell is, here it is, that if people start to realize that we are more than just matter, that we are more than just our physical selves, I think so much of the crime and um, trauma out there would be reduced a lot. Like some of these people getting into the heavy drugs out there, like in parts of Portland and Kensington in the Philadelphia regions. I feel like if they had kind of a recognition of their spiritual and divine aspect, it would help them get off their conditions. It's unfortunate that so many people are just grasping on the idea that there is nothing beyond our material selves. I think that's what's causing so much trauma in the world. That's exactly what these archons, these entities want us to believe, that we don't have a soul or a spirit or a significant role to play in the cosmos. And if
Yeah.
humanity comes to realize, yes, we do, I think it would change a lot of the violence and destruction going on in the world today.
Especially with the materialism. The further you move into materialism, the further away from God and spirit that you're moving also. I mean,
Mhm.
this,
Yeah, theosophy from Rudolf Steiner, I mean, his approach is that there's two forces that work. One of the models I'll say is there's Aramaic forces, which is the material aspect, and then there's Luciferian forces, which is the spiritual aspect. And we as humans, our objective is to balance those forces. You want to balance the spiritual and the material, the Luciferian and the Aramaic, because if you go too far in the Luciferian, you stop paying your bills, you stop eating, you're just in la la land off in the
Yeah.
spiritual realm. You're not taking out the trash anymore, you're not cleaning the toilets. If you go too far in the Aramaic aspect, you're just in the materialism of buy, buy, buy. We need this, we want that, the latest trends. So it's a balance, and we're definitely off balance, but I think people are recognizing this. I mean, people are starting to wake up to some of this stuff.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think balance is the key, and I'm seeing such a split right now. Like I really think we are in like biblical historic times right now, right? We're seeing, I called it the Spellbreakers podcast because I do see the hold that the controllers have over us as spelling, right? They've been casting spells. Some of these spells are hundreds of years old in mind control, mass mind control, right? That's what we're talking about here.
yeah,
And I see people more than ever waking up. But then at the
yes.
same time, I see more insanity than ever. People acting like insane possessed beasts in public, in government offices. You know what I mean? And I don't even want to make it left and right. It's just total insanity. But then at the same time, it is this, you know, great time of revelation. Yeah, so it's a very exciting time, and that's how I see it. I'd be curious. Do you guys resonate with that, or?
Yeah, the one thing you said about the office, if you look at that list of schizophrenic patterns that I told you is on my website, and you look at what's coming over the mainstream media right now, there's a one-to-one correspondence between all these psychotic patterns and what's coming over CNN and ABC and all these major
I see that on
networks right
mainstream and non-mainstream. I mean, I see it going on in all types of media out there.
Yeah,
well, especially mainstream,
yeah.
especially mainstream.
I knew a schizophrenic, and when he watched CNN, he would be like, "Oh, I'm hearing Satan." Like he would hear voices, and a lot of these hosts seem to be actually possessed. Like you see their eyes, they're dead eyes, and sometimes they don't blink for like 2 minutes. Like I guess I'd be curious, and on what do you think in terms of just possession? Like, do you think most of our leaders are just like legitimately possessed?
well, as far as I mean, the news media is always trying to agitate you. They're just trying to stir up
Yeah,
emotions in you because it's a drug
yeah,
to
It's
some
negative
human beings.
emotions.
They
yeah,
and they keep you keep going back to it. I'm just as guilty. I'll watch some of the news, then I'll get so irate. I said, no, I don't need this. I'm going to go for a walk. Get away
yeah.
from it for a while. And it's division and everything else that's going on. As far as the politicians goes and the leaders, it's both because I've worked I've worked with government. I've worked as kind of with a lobbying group for years ago, and I've seen both sides. And it really depends who's rising into the ranks. Yes, psychopaths rise up can rise up in the ranks of both governments and companies and other organizations. But I do know some politicians out there who I would say are decent people that are trying
Mhm.
to do the best that they can.
Yeah, for sure.
And look what they have to work with out there. I mean,
Yeah,
it's very hard to try and improve things when you have to get into the muck with the pigs out there sometimes too.
yeah.
So I don't think it's certain leaders. I mean, there's something called strange attractors in the world of physics and chaos theory and string theory. And I think we get these personalities, these charismatic personalities out there sometimes that could tend to lead a flock astray. I mean, look at Adolf Hitler. I mean, he kind of did that with his people. He saw a place to do that. And we see these charismatic leaders coming up throughout history and doing this sort of thing
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
where people lose the ability to discern, and these leaders get to be very powerful, and then it kind of goes. And then again, maybe they're not that balanced. A little bit of the Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde type of approach, where they'll be very nice to get to a certain point or power and position as being Dr. Jekyll, but then the Mr. Hyde aspect takes over because they can't handle the power, they can't handle the responsibility that comes with it, and they crack. I mean, we're all human. We have to be careful how much power that we choose to take on as
Yeah.
individuals because it can overwhelm some people and actually possess them. So the question is, okay, are these leaders becoming this way because they're in positions of power, or were they always that way and trying to rise the way to the top to take over? I don't really know. I've seen both. I've seen some good leaders and some bad leadership out there.
Yeah. Yeah. I would say that I believe the system is anti-human and by design. Within it, there are good actors and bad actors. I do see psychopathy rising to the top, though. There's a
Yeah, I agree.
psychopathic element of the system itself, right? Like just the idea of fractional reserve banking, or let's say corporations, right? Like, I don't think corporations are all evil or capitalism is all evil, but by nature, they want to maximize shareholder value, right? And they are, amoral institutions, right? And so, right, there's this psychopathy embedded into many elements of the system, right? Even the legal system. And we see everything, it kind of seems like it always gets worse, right? Like we get less rights, more taxes, more inflation, more, wealth inequality. And I don't want to be a doomer, but I just see this like meat grinding anti-human element of the system we find ourselves in, which I think is somehow related to the
I think
controllers.
you're right. And the military industrial complex is another big one, you know,
I mean, if you
thrives on killing people.
if you look at the average life expectancy, I think it's still higher now than it was, say, 100 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But it tends to have its ups and dips. I mean, we're making sacrifices for this type of lifestyle. I mean, we seem to be exposed to more carcinogenics. Just the psyche seems to be becoming so fractured and disoriented with all the misinformation out there and what's
Mm-hmm.
going on. Some people are stepping away from it. They're realizing, I don't need this stuff in my world. This is not making me a happy person or a good human being. So I think there's that sort of transition going on. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
look at social media and YouTube. There's some great stuff on YouTube.
Yeah.
There's some awful, horrible stuff on there too.
Yep.
And that's where you got to apply the sort of discernment. What do you want to watch to make you feel good? And I get sometimes caught up in looking at something that's a little controversial or something like that too. I find myself doing that. It's an addiction. It's an endorphin rush sometimes. But it's being self-awareness, realizing, okay, time to get off, time to go and do something different.
Yeah, yeah, totally. And that's another thing that I really resonate with about Christianity is like the idea of Christ as the ideal and we accepting that we all fall short, but we're striving for that, right? And I think if we don't have those higher ideals, higher principles, we get pulled down into the muck because the world itself is like a very low vibration, low energy realm, right? Like if you just eat the food that they tell you is you're supposed to eat, if you watch the movies, the TV shows, like you're going to be in this low energy where I think most people are open to some type of demonic attack. Like, like at this point you have to be intentional every day, I think, because you just get brought, like by nature you just get brought back down again. But
Yeah, you'll get sucked in.
Yeah, you have to reflect on things often, just see where you are. And that's the thing. We're thrown into an imperfect world and expected to be perfect. I mean, come on. That's not a fair or reasonable responsibility to be placed on us as human beings. But I think we have to make the best we can while we're here.
yeah.
That's what it comes down to. And I've seen some of the Gnostics can be very doom and gloom and it's not worth it. And I'm like, okay, that's a little bit too negative for me. I have hope in humanity. I feel like there's enough people are trying, and maybe we'll get past that critical mass. I mean, the fact we haven't blown ourselves up as a species yet, I find that to be a miracle in of itself. The fact that we still are here. Yes, the planet has some issues that it's dealing with. I think we can pull out. There's always hope. And I think of what I went through. You know, I was at the most darkest time in my life. If I taught these entities anything, it's that even when humanity is faced with those darkest of moments, they're still capable of love.
Yep.
And that says something to our place in the cosmos. And I use the word healthy love because, you know, love can be weaponized too, like anything else out there. But healthy love, I tend to use that as the catchphrase.
Very well said. Yeah, well, I think we'll wrap things up here. Yeah, Anon, I want to thank you very much for your story. I think sharing your story will help a lot of people. Yeah, would love to have you on again. And Jerry as well. I want to thank you guys both, not just for coming on, but your patience. You know, I counted after I got a report emailed on the stream here, and it was 15 times that my internet and stuff went down, and totally unreal. So the fact that we were able to, I guess, even finish this call, I think is a mini miracle of sorts. But yeah, I wanted to thank you guys very much for coming on. Yeah, jerrymarzinsky.com, link below. Please support Jerry and his work. Anon, do you want to plug anything, or is there any way people
Yeah,
can
actually,
reach you? Or
I did write a book. It's called Revelations on Interstellar Highway 10.
okay,
I don't have a showing mirror, it might be showing mirror image there, but I have a website. It's astroxrising.com. That's ASTEROXRISING.com. And I'll send you a link to that for the show notes.
yep,
But it took me about 30 years to write this book. And I started after my schizophrenic experiences, but it kind of goes into my search for truth and religious understanding. It's kind of what got me to this point. It's kind of what got me to connect to Jerry. It doesn't go so much directly into my schizophrenic experiences, but there are hidden messages within the book itself. And it's a search for truth and trying to deal with reality and to make us better human beings. I call it a bit of a manual to help us get through life in a sense.
that's
And
great.
I got one here too. It's called An Amazing Journey into the Psychotic Mind, Breaking the Spell of the Ivory Tower. And it talks all about how we came to the conclusion that the voices are indeed entities and not hallucinations like the psychiatric mafia said they are. So that's been a 50-year trip to come to these conclusions.
All right, guys. Well, please go support their work. They're both very inspiring people. Love what they are doing here. Very positive message, very helpful, very solution oriented. As well, our sponsor, Eric, his email is on the screen here, ericmace at macelifecatalyst.com. He is a MACE Energy practitioner. I have used him. I think he's phenomenal. MACE is a very groundbreaking method of letting go of traumas and energetic blockages that you may have. What I say is very innovative that I personally liked was the fact that I did one session, it was 2 hours. I let go of more things that were weighing on me for most of my life than in any type of talk therapy or any other session. I didn't actually have to express what I was dealing with internally, which is very nice to, opening yourself up to a stranger is very awkward. And I think talk therapy can actually re-traumatize some people. I don't want to
Yeah.
say it's all bad, but I think for some people, so for me, it was exactly what I needed. And I recommend you guys reach out to Eric. He'll tell you what he does. If you don't get relief, he will refund your money or he won't charge you at all. So please reach out to him as well. Okay, guys, thank you very much for joining, fellow Spellbreakers.